I wanted very much that sense of the world as perfectly a strangeness, that is, if we're discovering and rediscovering the world through these donkeys for the first time, and the universe, really.
Well, Alison, welcome to Director's Notes.
Well, it's lovely to be here.
I was really excited and I was chasing you because I really wanted an interview for this film. It's very unique. It stands alone in its block. And I mean, I'll just, if you don't mind, take a second for you to introduce us to the film and sort of what we're going to be talking about today.
Sarah, I'll just share the log line, which I wrote long ago,
Perfect.
but yeah, it's three donkeys are in an unnamed desert, and they discover an abandoned astronomical observatory and the universe. And it's an exploration of what, the second line I have, it's an exploration of what a story can be.
Yes. That is something that I was so interested in. And I was sort of reading that the story has, it's got ambitions to redefine it. I'd love to know what that means to you. When you wrote that, what were you thinking?
But just that all sorts of questions. What can a story be? Does a story need a big dramatic arc, as is traditionally said with beginning, middle, end? I don't believe that, but what can a story be? A moment in time? Can a story be a gesture? Can a story be how a camera and sound, brings to life, comes into being what I guess I think of, I love some of Robert Frank, the photographer's quotes, that he talks about the poetry behind the surfaces of things. And so, my background is as a poet.
Yeah.
I haven't published for a long time, but I published when I was not that much, but when I was, 18, 19, 20. And then I just started to put my poetry into theater, and then, more recently film. But yeah, I've been inspired, well, certainly by poetry, but also by oral traditions. My first film really featured, though they're not labeled as such, the last generation of a Gaelic oral tradition. And my great grandmother was from the Hebrides and had that, was known as that kind of storyteller. So for me, all that, the poetic and that form of story that has a kind of what I would call an uncontrived simplicity, that in picture and sound, was how can I explore that? And how can I explore that without any text or voiceover or anything, So it was, yeah, just trying to tell like a tall tale, almost like a jazz score. I wrote it in 4 movements. And but it's this hybrid form between following this treatment in 4 movements and being open, as any good documentary will be, to what's happening in the moment, in that journey, in that form of story. I
Yeah.
don't know if that answers your question a
No,
bit.
that does. That answers my question and more. Um, it's definitely sort of talking about the documentary, so it's been open to different things, but I mean, it's really kind of got a fictional feel to it, and there's a story behind it which guides the documentary itself. How did you manage that balance?
Between trying to follow my treatment, you mean, and
Yeah.
trying to, yeah, just really, we had a tiny crew. It's an arts council indie film, right? So, um, it was just myself, director of photography, and a focus puller, camera assistant from Chile, and and we were really just like three little kids,
Mm.
following the. It was very simple. I mean, if I was going to boil down the 4 movements, is donkeys in unnamed desert, donkeys arrive in the desert. I
Mm.
mean, in the abandoned astronomical observatory, which of course isn't really abandoned, but we filmed it that way. And then they explore, and but within that, what we see, I mean, there's more to it, of course, because we sense, I hope, or that's the idea, that you sense a conversation they're pulled into this observatory, and there's a conversation between the donkeys and this abandoned observatory, and we played with different lenses and sounds to bring to life that conversation. So so what am I trying to say in terms of this? How did we bring that to life? And then of course, yeah, the third movement, the observatory comes to life, etc. But yeah, it was just that, it was more directing the donkeys to try to get them up the hill. And then of course being open to what they were doing, certainly with their ears and stopping and really just playing with the moments that were presented to us. But then at certain times, we just, was more challenging because we had to get them certain places. But on the whole, we tried to, well, it was a combination of really directing them with our tiny crew and chasing them at times, and then being just with them as they were scratching and exploring and just being with the what's extraordinary about that locale for me is it's not only do you feel like you're on another planet, but because it's so, um, I find it so extraordinarily beautiful and otherworldly to use a word that's often described for the Atacama Desert, but it also has this tremendous absence of familiar sound. So there's something about, you hear their hoofs and you hear, I wanted very much that sense of the world is perfectly a strangeness. That is, if we're discovering and rediscovering the world through these donkeys for the first time, and the universe, really,
Yeah,
both macro, both both yeah, macro and in terms of the night sky.
yeah. At one point, there's I don't know the proper name. Is it like a little fox, an desert fox
Yeah.
or something? That moment to me, I loved that moment.
Oh,
And
thank you.
was that a moment? I mean, was that just let's wait and see and what happens?
No, it's just that like the piscacha that you see before the fox at the
Yeah.
very beginning, which is a desert animal chili, which is, looks like a giant rabbit, but it's not quite, it's way bigger than a rabbit. So it's this, anyway, they call them piscachas. I mean, that was just us bailing out of the car to get the piscacha for a moment, and and likewise for the fox, we happened to be just walking around following the donkeys, and this fox presented itself, and you know, and Nicola went for it, and so yeah, and the fox was, and then we tried to get the fox back with a little more food, to see if the fox would come again, but the fox wasn't interested. But we got him or her once, so that was great.
Yeah, I think for me it kind of changed the pace because the donkeys, they're very slow. They feel
Yeah.
very deliberate in their sort of meandering, really. I think I really like the way they walk and experience things. I think I'm quite similar. People pass me all the time, they get so annoyed, and I'm like, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
But then when the fox comes in, I think we feel, I don't know, I felt a bit of agitation come.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's probably scared, no, that
Yeah,
fox.
but it was something, and it was just I don't know the way it contrasted. I thought that was yeah, that was really
Oh,
interesting.
so great.
So you've got a tiny crew, you're in the middle of nowhere, but you're shooting on CinemaScope.
Yes.
So, I mean, what cameras did you have? And you've got those beautiful anamorphic lenses. Were you gear heavy?
We were. It was a bit, I was completely mad always, like it's just, I got it in my head to get Hawk anamorphic lenses, which are normally very, very expensive. Well, because of, to replicate the near panoramic vision of the donkeys, I wanted anamorphic lenses, but I sort of went for the best, well, I don't know about the best, but very good ones. And uh, yeah, so we had those that I convinced a Los Angeles company to give us for this
Hmm.
incredible rate. And then we had, these cinema lenses from Montreal because, well, we'd gotten them all together, when I wanted for a point of view for the observatory. So there were more zoom lenses to give that surveillance feeling. So we were just sort of laden down. Somehow miraculously made it to Chile with all these lenses, and yeah, it was a bit mad for a tiny crew, but uh, yeah. there we are. But that's what we, there was something more to your question, no?
No, so I mean, this is what I wanted to know. So I wanted to know, like the specific cameras and the lenses.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot. I apologize. We used an Arri Alexis Mini
Okay,
for the shoot, and particular lenses would be these Hawk anamorphic, like I say. There was a 24 millimeter and a 55. They're called Hawk's Light anamorphics, and then we used a canoptic. I may have got it wrong, but it's a lens that in a couple of the shots you see that's almost it's a little sci-fi, and it's apparently Nicola Canniccioni, the DOP, um, loves that lens. It's an old lens, not so expensive, but apparently Kubrick used it. And so we used that, and we used an Angenieux zoom for the more, like as I mentioned, surveillance sense of the telescope. So I didn't want anything to feel like menacing, but I wanted that sense of that they were, the keeping track of where the donkeys were. And what else? And for those were the major lenses. And then for doing the time lapses, I did most of them myself, and they were just with and some we did as a crew, but they were they were all with photographic lenses, because you can't, of course, at night you can't have any lights in an observatory. So we used a Sony, I think it was an A7S3 or something, but they're very light sensitive and very wide, 14, and I don't know if we used any wider than, but open wide lenses to capture the night sky. But
mm,
just it was simple, for this night sky with simple tripods. And then at times when we shot the night sky, we were shooting with a Shogun too, to capture more of the buildings. But when we were doing the time lapses, it was just legs.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, in my mind, I was like, they must have had a crew. There was people carting these things everywhere. But I love that it was just the three of you,
no,
sort of they're rapidly changing.
yeah.
You mentioned Nicola and your cinematographer, and I was sort of looking into his filmography. And I mean, I know that every choice is important, but what drew you to him and his style?
I hadn't worked with Nicola before. There's wonderful DOPs in Montreal, as well, everywhere. And the wonderful DOP I was working with wasn't available, and he was recommended. And yeah, he was great to work with. I mean, because he's very experienced in fiction as
Mm,
well as documentary. We just discussed the treatment, and then because you don't have time, obviously, you want somebody who simply they sees, he sees the Palomo's white ears going all over the place, and then he moves gently to capture at the end of the shot, the antenna. It's just what I wanted, and he's just very, like any good DOP, if he sees that there's he just gives it his all. It was very much an arts council, he wasn't, nobody on this team they did it for love of the film.
yeah, I can imagine I mean, all cinema's art, but there's a real art in being able to capture that landscape in sort of that particular way that you did. Yeah, I can see the appeal there.
Well, it's
How,
also because, yeah, go
no, go
ahead,
on.
sorry. No, 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 just that it's so we didn't discuss it much, but just a tiny bit. I mean, it's so beautiful there that it's very, you really also don't want to do a picture postcard kind of observatory shot. So it's very important to me not to in the same way I didn't want an anthropomorphic view of these donkeys as much as possible. I wanted something visceral and that felt new, felt like we were really following these donkeys in a new way. But but also I didn't want some, typical observatory, picture postcardy, obviously, view of an observatory. So anyway, Nicola isn't interested in that either.
Mm. Because there's something, you're in this otherworldly thing in the observatory. It's metal, it's harsh, it doesn't fit with the landscape at all. Um, but the way you filmed it, it's like a piece of art. Like the scenes where you're inside and sort of the inner mechanics. I found those gorgeous, and I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, there's beautiful shots of a machine. So how did you approach sort of, yeah, getting that machinery to look so divine?
Ooh, well, thank you. Well, I wanted it all. I wanted, there's a mythic element clearly in the film, that's inspired actually by a myth that I heard in Scotland when I was doing my first film, when I was in Orkney among the standing stones. And the local myth was that at midnight the standing stones start to dance until dawn, when they become stones again. And that was a bit like my first experience in the observatory, because I arrived and everybody was asleep, or it felt abandoned. And yet I walked among these domes and they felt alive because you could hear various sounds coming from them. And then, of course, when the sun goes down and the stars come out, they feel like they dance, right?
Mhm.
Then they dance till dawn and then fold up again, fold their eyes from inward. So basically there's this mythic element, but I don't know, it doesn't, I didn't want it to feel cold. I wanted it to feel like these, because they are these giants. And and so we filmed actually at another observatory, which is much more modern, called Paranal, up in the north, all the inner side, all those inside shots, because I wanted to feel the sense of the power and the guts and the heart of the observatory,
Mm.
which isn't in the other observatory. But yeah, I just wanted them to, it didn't want it to feel menacing or
Yeah.
whatnot. So we were lucky to have these amazing lenses. And it was difficult. Just a quick note is that there were no it's the first time anybody been filming. Like, that's not quite true in the sense they filmed it for scientific purposes, but for some reason we were given the privilege of filming, like those carts are what they call the delay line, and they're usually in complete darkness. And because our breath and the light, etc., and dust can destroy our observations, and all those other spectrographs, the ones that are, I find, also really beautiful, those are usually in this big metal box, right? Because again of our, so we were somehow, we had these poet scientists who loved film, who were open these things for us. And then it was very delicate because we had to put some light on them, but too much light, they stop moving because they're in darkness. So I don't know if that answers, but it's yeah, it was just a challenge how to film those so that they feel like paintings. I mean, they feel beautiful.
Yeah. No, I think you did answer it as well, and it's treating them with delicacy and seeing them wake up, and the whole film to me, it had such an inquisitive feel. You wanted to know more about the story, why they're there, what we're looking at, but also you're looking out to something that, there are more questions than we'll ever have, in what you're capturing. So yeah, I think that's it. It's a nature of sort of inquisition rather than just observation
Well,
that
thank
works
you.
with everything.
Thank you.
No. So with the two different locations, so was one just for the inside and the other for the outside?
Yeah, one was for they're quite far apart, sir. So below where we shot with the donkeys just in an observatory called La Silla, and the other ones, oof, well, we drove. It's like 12 hours in the desert to get to the other one, so it's a long way away.
Yeah. And the whole, are we replicating 24 hours?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of film, yes, in the
Yeah.
story of film,
Yeah.
yes.
So I'd love to know sort of how that was captured, how you got the right pacing and the feeling and knowing the balance between sort of the different parts of the story.
Gosh, I don't know. I was just lucky to work with an amazing team, right? I mean, I had a treatment, and actually, the treatment very much was the guide of the film. But
Yeah.
as to the timing, I guess, you know, it was a short kind of movement one, let's call it, was short. They're in this desert. You see them, and then they quickly you have a sense that they discover something and then
Mm.
start to go up to the observatory. So that was relatively short. And um, then I guess the second movement, let's say the exploration is the longest one, which hopefully you build that, you build that tension and build that conversation between something's going to happen, but we're not quite sure what, between the donkeys and this observatory. And then I'm not really answering your question, but when the observatory comes to life, I really wanted that symphonic and
Yeah.
that to really surprise with sound, and but the conversation to continue. And then of course when the dawn comes and they leave, it's again quite quickly, like mirroring the first movement, you could say, the fourth movement. So
Yeah.
I don't really know how to answer properly, except that I just, worked with a wonderful editor in Chile, and we it was actually the edit was actually relatively, it wasn't very complicated. Um, what was complicated at times is because the donkeys would escape and we had to do a lot of day for night,
Yeah.
because it was hard to film with them at night because they would escape. And then we had very little time filming, so it just was exhausting because we'd have to find them. So but yeah, so we had to cobble, I guess is what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
at times, because in the editing, but that's not so unusual because of
No.
what happened in the shoot.
No. I just I wanted to ask because in sort of the initial how you were approaching it was to, change the idea of a narrative and a story, but then
Right.
it just magically falls into its own pace and narrative. So yeah, so I wanted to sort of know the links between that really.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Um, yeah, no, I think it was just this, the spine or the jazz score that I'd written, um, allowed us freedom to really just explore and then find in the editing room um, sort of the balance between those four movements, but the score continued. And before we even shot, I had several ideas about the eyes and the ears and all that. But so much of that was just one of those wonderful accidents. Like, I'll give you an example. A more concrete example is like, because we were playing like kids, but with these basic elements of cinema, light, movement, shadow, reflection, sound, um, without text. And then, we'd see reflections on the radio telescope, or, and then of course, because I was doing time lapses, I realized that radio telescope at night was a wonderful place to do a time lapse because all the stars were, so it was really just, it was that manner of having a sort of school, a backbone, and then really just all of us seeing various things in the moment with the donkeys and in the environment, and playing off those things that we felt were um, were exciting visually and sonically. And so, but to give you again, to go to the concrete example, like when we did the time lapse from day to night,
Mm.
you see and all these shadows go into night. Well, if you look closely, you can see a donkey's head in those shadows. And many people have seen it, others not, but that's fine, where they see it on the second or third viewing. But that was, I mean, there's no manipulation in that. And in other places, like, we didn't, of course we color corrected, but there's no Photoshop and things like that. Um, so that was, I guess I'm just giving you that was a happy accident that
Yeah.
often happens when you think, oh wow, there's something in this film, as strange as it might be. And scientists afterwards, a scientist who was opening all these doors for us, he sent me a picture. He said, look, there's a donkey's head. We've been seeing it for years, but now I see it's really a donkey's head. And we said, we've seen that.
They didn't make the discovery.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there was many happy accidents, you could call them.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk music.
Yeah.
Because as we said, we sort of go up and everything comes to life and there's this crescendo, and I likened it to tubular bells.
Mm.
That's
Do
what
you
I was
mean
hearing.
the bells? These
Yeah,
bells? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. They call them, well, Ben calls them, the composer calls them gamelan strips.
Okay.
And they're these, I guess they're toned somewhat like a gamelan, but he had a, well, not specifically for him, I think, but you know, a musician made these, or an instrument builder made these. And so uh but those were, I called them bells too, but that's what they were really.
Yeah. No, that's what I heard. And sort of, I mean, The Exorcist is tubular bells, but in a lot more sinister. But it was that sort of music, and there's something that reminded me there. What did you have in your mind when you were imagining the kind of sound that would come?
In truth, I didn't know. I just knew that at all. But it was what's so magical about working with Ben is I don't ever with composers, I haven't done that many films, but the last thing I would do, but certainly in theater too, is I would come to composer um, with a track and tell them to do that, you know. I remember working with my last film with an editor in Chile, and that's what she usually does. And she was a little like, I think, wonderful editor, but she's a little kind of unnerved that I wasn't doing that. I said, no, I want to see what the composer gives back to me, you know, and I'm not a composer. So to answer your question, what I knew though is that I wanted a music that felt improvised. I
Yeah.
wanted a fresh palette of sounds that we didn't associate with, because you know, yeah, I wanted something fresh and without associations. Like it was very easy, it was a great learning because in this more tall tale, you could easily put a certain darker sound, and people will feel that, oh, we're going into the observatory and something horrible is going to happen, right? And so with Ben, it was really a discussion: is how can we, particularly at the beginning, how can I wanted that that I had already in my head is that, or my body, it was that I wanted first you not to know what was observational sound. Well, first it was observational sound, but then the quote music comes in so subtly that you're not sure what it is. Is it when the donkeys start to hear something? And is it, but it had to be, I felt really subtle.
Yeah.
So you'd hear it, but what is this? And then gradually it's still subtle when they enter, but gradually the presence and the conversation in sound becomes more apparent. But again, I think what was most important for me, and then of course it opens up more symphonically, but what was important to me is how could it feel, yeah, how could it feel, I keep on using the word fresh, but you know, and that's a real challenge, right? And I loved how Ben, well, he's a hurdy-gurdy player and an improviser, but I loved how he chose hurdy-gurdy, tuba, these gamelan strips, which he played, and then he used this pianette from the 1970s. And so they're instruments you don't normally use in a film, you know, and so that also felt really right. You know, so basically it was a process of with him discussing, and then he would try something, and it would be often it was just paring down, you know,
Mm.
less. So, and what is the exact moment, and how can it feel like something's happening, but not something dark, you know, that's happening, and you know, how can it transport you in a unique way? I don't, yeah.
Yeah, but it's certainly it's not a sound that I'm used to hearing in films. And that's why I think, yeah, immediately I was like, it's The Exorcist. It's when he's standing outside at the front, and yeah, it's not one that I think we're used to, great suites of violin, and which are brilliant, and they're there to carry our emotion. But yeah, it's when they're sort of different. I'm like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I love when composers find random instruments and
Yes,
bring them in. I think that's the joy, and the real, yeah, the unique aspect of their work.
yes, I agree.
And then when we're inside and we're filming the machines, how did you capture that sound?
Well, none of that, yeah, most people don't know that, so I'll repeat myself again, but which is cool is that all the sounds inside are hurdy-gurdy and bend sounds. There's not
Okay.
one observatory sound. So how I did ask Ben to, because my initial idea for sound was that we'd use the sounds of the observatory because there's some wonderful sounds. And then I started to listen to them. And when we were in the edit with, I was in the edit with Chile with Carolina Sierra Queen, yeah, I just thought, no, these sounds aren't interesting enough. For one moment they're fine, but they're just repetitive and whatnot. So he did listen to some of those, but then he just improvised. So there's not one, yeah, the only sound of the observatory, I think I'm right about this, is at the end when dawn comes again at the very end and the observatories close. That's a real sound with some, and it's that pumping you hear is the nitrogen, which it has a beautiful rhythm like in the observatory. There's some interesting sounds, but so it's all improvised,
Huh?
basically.
Okay. And when you're in, when you're somewhere like the desert with that vastness, sounds, they take on such a different quality.
Yes. But it's so quiet, Sarah.
Yeah.
It's like it's so unbelievably, magically quiet.
Mm. And just, I'd love to sort of, you premiered at Cannes, and because of the nature of the film, and because, it's not something that, if I was sitting in a documentary block, at a festival, I would be overjoyed if this played, because it's not something that you normally see. So I'd love to hear about some audience reactions, some conversations, and different things that have come out with the film.
Well, I mean, people that seem to um, enjoy, I'm not sure what the word is, my film, uh, who will enter it, they seem to, many people have, I mean, been moved because many people write me or come up to me afterwards.
Mm.
Um, And so some of the comments, I mean, if you're expecting a film about donkeys or a more conventional story, you're going to be disappointed. But I think if you can enter it without those assumptions, um, it's, it's more sensorial and cinematic. There is a story there. It's just a different form of story. But to get to your question is, yeah, just everything from being really touched by people who saying they've never seen a film like this and how much it stayed with them. So that's a huge, huge honor as a filmmaker. And then, I mean, has come often from filmmakers too.
Mm.
And everything from, when we got nominated, when the film was nominated, it was everything from filmmakers I'd met and don't know at various festivals saying, my God, I didn't know, the Oscars would admit this kind of film, you know, because it's so out of the box, it's not a, it's not the usual kind of Oscar film. So that's also been a compliment because in truth, yeah. Yeah, I never in a million years did I think we'd get into the Cannes, let alone, get to the Oscars. So it was just that this film has taken on this wonderful, surprising journey. And to go back to your question, yeah, and I've also been moved, I guess the last thing I'll say is moved by more, you could say more filmmakers in the US in particular who make really important films, but they're more, I would call more conventionally classical, or maybe classical is a better word, classical documentary films, more interview style, and those films, of course, are very important too. But I've been moved by some of those filmmakers, many of them quite famous, who have um, seem to be very supportive of my film too. So all that is many surprises. Um,
I think as well, I mean, I certainly am with film. I'm always wanting to be surprised. I'm always
yeah.
wanting to see something that is genuinely something brand new. And, you know, y- yeah, you experimenting with those lenses and that camera and what you can do with that. I just think that's such a delight. And we need more of that. I want to be surprised more.
Thank you.
And how have you found the journey? Because as you said, and I've spoken to some of the other documentary makers, and they're incredible. They're powerful stories. They're told, interpreted in different ways. But you're the only independent one in the category.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So we
what's
have no money too.
no,
That's
no. So what's that been like? Because you're walking into something like the Oscars and people are campaigning with massive budgets and big names behind them. But I am always one for the underdog and the small guy. That is always where my heart lies.
yeah. Well, we're certainly the underdog.
Yeah,
Um, uh, yeah, it's bizarre at times, but like I say, in these because the film was nominated for another award called Cinema Eye Honors too,
yeah.
and so went to LA before. What I has made it because to be honest, I've asked myself several times, why am I doing this? Because I want to make films, and it takes enormous amount of energy. But there's been a lot of great aspects, which is just really it boils down to getting to know much more of an international community, which is more American, I must say. Even though the International Documentary Association, I met a number of Europeans,
Mhm.
it's more biased on the American. I mean, look at who's nominated for documentary short. I think my film's the only international one, really, isn't it? I'm not sure. But anyway,
Children
um,
No More
or
is
maybe that one
really,
too, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. But two of them, still three are, American.
yeah, no,
So it still
absolutely.
feels it still feels very American, but I think I'm deviating from your question, but
No, it's all part of the same conversation.
yeah. So it's a bit well, but to get how does it feel? It just feels yeah, it's certainly exhausting because you're trying to it feels like David and Goliath. That's what it really
Yeah,
feels like.
yeah.
It really feels like that to an extreme. I mean, the budgets I'm told that Netflix and HBO pay are huge, are enormous, even for a short. And so you feel we can't do even one of those ads, right? So it feels but one thing I did, which is it's in Hollywood Deadline, you can look at where I can send it to you. But what's really fun is after the nominees luncheon, we did a kind of secret shoot with a donkey in Los Angeles. And the point of the shoot, I can send it to you, but the point of the shoot really was to Hollywood needs independent film, and we played with the Hollywood sign. Um, and and I really believe that, and so, but it was fun to do it because we did it in a humorous way.
Yeah.
And it's really, of course, a promotion trying to get people to look at your film. Because what's difficult with no promo budget, as you know, is how do you get all those how do you get eyeballs that they know that this film exists,
Mm.
right? And yeah, so that's the biggest. And if you don't have certain funding or connections, I mean, some films have like multiple executive producers,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
um, so it does feel. I was talking to one Academy, I think he's called Governor, in the lunch, and we were just talking about, how, well, for me anyway, it's totally imbalanced. That if that how can you if campaigns are about who has more money, then that has nothing to do with cinema, you know?
No, no, that's a conversation that I have sort of amongst people I work with all the time.
Yeah.
And with director's notes, I'm so lucky to be able to watch such a breadth of work. And then when it comes to the awards time and our coverage there, you do sort of look at things, and as a guy, I get to see so much different work that covers so many different subjects. And then there's just something that's a bit, I don't know, they all feel a bit too similar to me sometimes. And I want that variety. I want to be surprised. I want to be shocked. I want to be overwhelmed. That's what I want by it all.
Well, so do I as a viewer. I mean, and also well, I think well, I won't bash the studios, but too much anyway, but is that, I just not interested in packaging, I'm just not interested in, it's just not filmmaking for me.
No, it's not. I think it takes the fun away from it. I know someone, he's a pilot, and he works for sort of, I guess what you'd call a more budget airline. And I think, I've had this discussion with him. I'm like, look, you're a pilot, you can go and work for a big airline. And he's like, yeah, but I love taking off and landing. I love the actual practical parts of flying. And he's like, when you work for sort of a big transatlantic, he's like, you take off and then you're just in the air for hours. And I thought it was brilliant. I was like, yes, that actually makes total sense.
Yeah, no, it's true. True, it is. Yeah, but yeah. I also think, it's the packaging, but it's if the audience doesn't have space to imagine, um, space to breathe in a film, I'm just not interested in explaining in my filmmaking. But that's not meant as, any kind of blanket criticism of, but I think that's way of any particular filmmaker at all. Um, but I feel that the studios often push that kind of film. No?
Yep, I think it's then they're looking at it's a easier mass audience, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it covers. But I could talk about this for far too long. So I'm gonna close this with a question that I'm very excited to hear your response. And it's something I'm asking filmmakers is to tell us about your favorite short or maybe shorts, that
Mm.
could be your favorite of all time. It could be one that you've seen recently. Yeah, it's sort of opening up our eyes as well to different work and what people are indulging in at the moment.
Ooh, that's a hard one for me, Sarah, because I don't watch a lot of shorts. I mean, I just made a short because, well, I really I had to actually create a short after my feature, um, but it was, certainly not a calling card. It's a short, I think, that lives as a short, but not a great one to answer about shorts. I mean, the one that comes to mind at the moment, and like I say, I really don't see a lot of shorts, but was this one at TIFF that I saw? It was something like Being John Smith. I don't know if you know, if he's a British filmmaker, isn't he, John Smith?
Yes.
And it's just quite a silly film, but silly in a good way. He's exploring his name, John Smith, and with humor and it's beautifully filmed. I mean, not so. I suppose you call it maybe experimental classic because it's not really experimental. Plays with a documentary form to anyway, I enjoyed it. I just enjoyed it. I remember feeling like I was um, surprised, in a in a gentle way. And but it didn't turn my head. No, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. But I haven't really seen it. And then I remember, but that was a long time ago. But I can't even remember the name. It was this. I think it's a wordless film with inside a photocopying machine. It's Eastern Europe. Have you seen that one? Copyman or something
No,
like
but
that.
I will find it.
But that's a while back. But I enjoyed it. It was more like what I remember it of was more in the spirit of Eisenstein or something playing on that. I think it's black and white. It's beautifully filmed and I think textless and I found it inventive. Those are the two that come to mind without me reflecting.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want. That's why I don't prepare. I don't ask people to look before. It's much more fun to see what comes to mind. And I love that you mentioned the John Smith film because my editor-in-chief, Marbell, I think he watched it. I can't remember his coverage of something. And my name is Sarah Smith. And
Ah,
anyway,
of course.
and he was trying to describe the film to me, and I just wasn't really sure what he was describing, which I think was a great sign as well. So it's one I'm on the lookout for because he was like, you just need to watch it. You need to experience it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, you've made me want to see it again. I remember I was and it came right after, if I remember correctly, it's called Wave or something. Can't remember what it's called. It's in TIFF. And when my film was at TIFF in 2024,
Yeah.
and I went to, was my favorite section in TIFF, which is more experimental. And it was a sort of a serious Godard, um, which I can appreciate, but it was just too heavy for me, this Godard this morning. And then came on this John Smith, and he was great afterwards. I don't know, it was just full of humor, and it definitely did surprise me, and it was just, there was a delicacy about it I enjoyed.
Oh, great. Okay, now I'm extra looking forward to it. And what about work? What's next? When the campaigning and the madness is over and you can get back to the heart of
Oh,
filmmaking.
I'm so excited to do that. Yeah, no, just I won't talk too much about them because I haven't. It's been too long, and I never like talking too much about something
No.
I'm working. But I'm yeah. I was working on in September when I put it down. But as a fiction screenplay, a feature fiction screenplay, and which is completely new to me. And I mean, I've done theater before, but it's a whole new adventure. And it's inspired by a family story. It's definitely fiction, but kind of a secret story in my family where my grandfather was a doctor and an opiate addict, and he had a very a secret life that I discovered when my grandmother died. And yeah, there's much more to say, but that's about it. But it's very much, it's not just, yeah, there's a lot of comedy in it, I think, too. Um, so that's exciting to me to get back to. It's very, I hope, very visual.
Mm,
And then also, and I'm also trying to play with form with that, of course. I always am.
yeah.
And then I'm in researching that, basically, I got to know various addicts, and they would still call themselves addicts, but um, yeah, drug addicts or addicted to drugs. Each of them would say something different, but in Scotland and in Canada and in the US. And a few of them have given me their life story rights. So there's some kind of hybrid I'm exploring with that. So
Wow.
yeah.
I'm excited. Um, Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this all day. I was like, I get to dig into this film. And I was teaching at the film school here in Brighton on Monday. And I was trying to tell some of the students about this documentary. And they were saying, so it's about donkeys. I was like, no. And they were like, so it's about space. I was like, no, it's not. So so now I have a bit more, but it's still a mystery in my mind, or it's still I haven't decided what I want it to be yet.
Great. Well, that's lovely. But hey, thank you so much.